Well, in Habakkuk chapter 1 and chapter 2 today, just the first 5 verses of chapter 2, we're going to see that the prophet Habakkuk will ask two questions that I believe that you and I have asked before, and I believe that mankind has been asking for centuries. And the questions are simply this. The first one, where are you, God? Where are you? In the midst of chaos, in the midst of brokenness, God, where are you? You probably have asked that before. I know I have. The second question is, why are you letting this happen? Why are you letting this evil? Why are you letting this injustice? Why are you letting all these things happen? Again, I've asked that before. I'm sure you have too. Mankind's been doing it for centuries. That's the root of the conversation that we're going to see here in the first chapter and the first 5 verses of the second chapter as well, because as we talked about yesterday, Habakkuk is very different than the other 11 minor prophets, where most of those are focused primarily on judgment and condemnation, the message of judgment and condemnation to a set people group, whether it was the Assyrians or those in Jerusalem or those in Judah. Here, this book is more of a dialogue between the prophet Habakkuk and God. Very similar to more so in the Psalms. We see in the Psalms people like David crying out. You look at Psalm 50, he's saying, crying out to God, asking God these certain questions, and we see God responding to him. But people have been asking questions like we see in Psalm 50, like we see in Habakkuk for centuries. You go back to the book of Job. If you've never studied the book of Job, I encourage you to go read Job. The first few chapters are absolutely brutal. As we get welcomed into the scene where God is permitting Satan himself to inflict certain things against his servant Job, because God believed he was going to be faithful. And as we see, Job was faithful. And then you see the incredible story unfold, and we see all these different things happen. But we even see that Job even cries out, saying, God, are you absent? God, where are you? Look at chapter 3 of the book of Job. He's basically asking God, where are you in the midst of all this? Why am I going through all these different things? Or you go back to the story of Exodus, when they finally left Egypt and they walked through the Red Sea and saw all this miraculous deliverance from God, whether it was the plagues, whether it was the opening of the sea. They come to a point where they're wandering around the wilderness and they're thinking, is God with us? He was with us then. He was with us in Egypt. He was with us when we saw the plagues. He was with us when he delivered us. He was with us across the Red Sea. But where is he now? And we see that question play out here in the book of Habakkuk when the prophet is looking across the world, specifically looking across Judah, and he sees so many injustices playing out as a result of man's sin and as man's wickedness, his corruption. There's so many difficult things. And Habakkuk is looking on these things, and he asks this question in the very beginning. Let's walk into this dialogue. The first 4 verses are just Habakkuk's complaint. The oracle that Habakkuk the prophet saw. He says, O Lord, how long shall I cry for help, and you will not hear? That's the first question. How long will I cry, and you will not hear? He's asking the question that we talked about just a second ago. Where are you, God? The second question is this. Or cry to you violence, and you will not save. Why do you make me see iniquity, and why do you sit, or why do you idly look at wrong? So why do you let this evil happen? Why do you let these things happen? He goes on to describe what he is seeing. He says, destruction and violence are before me. Strife and contention arise. So the law is paralyzed, and justice never goes forth. For the wicked surround the righteous, so righteous goes forth perverted. He says, God, why do you make me look at all this wrongdoing? Why do you make me see violence? Why do you make me see injustice and wickedness and sin? He says, the law is paralyzed, and the word of God, the very thing that you gave us to be the application of justice, the very thing that you gave us to be the standard of justice, is paralyzed. It's not doing anything. People are not listening to your word. People are not listening to you. People are not listening to me as a prophet. And he groups himself in there, we as the righteous ones are surrounded by the wicked. And justice, listen to verse 4, justice goes forth perverted. It's a very strong complaint to bring against God. He says, why are you making me look at evil? Why are you doing this? The Lord answers in verse 5, and he gives him an answer that would be very shocking. Imagine complaining to God about the things that you see, and then imagine God looking at you and say, I got some good news. And the good news is justice is coming, but the bad news is you're not going to like how I bring it. Look at verse 5. Look among the nations and see. Wonder and be astounded, for I am doing a work in your days that you would not believe if I told. He's preparing them. He said, I'm going to do something crazy that you wouldn't believe if I told you. You're going to be blown away by this. And here's what he's going to do. For behold, I'm raising up the Chaldeans, also known as the Babylonians, that bitter and hasty nation, who march through the breadth of the earth to seize dwellings not of their own. They are dreaded and fearsome. Their injustice and indignity go forth from themselves. Their horses are swifter than leopards, more fierce than the evening wolves. Their horsemen press proudly on. Their horsemen came from afar. They fly like an eagle swift to devour. They all come for violence, all their faces forward. They gather captives like sand. At kings they scoff, and at rulers they laugh. They laugh at every fortress, for they pile up earth and take it. Then they sweep like the wind and go on, guilty men, whose own might is their God. The good news, Habakkuk, is I'm bringing justice to Judah. I'm bringing justice on my people. I'm bringing justice for my people. Bad news is I'm doing so by raising up a nation, the Chaldeans, as I said, also known as the Babylonians, and they're going to come and wreak havoc on your nation. Imagine hearing this after you just said, God, why do you make me see violence? And now you hear the story of these people who are known for their violence, known for their bitterness, known for their hatred, known for their pride in their own right, pride in their own might, and also believe themselves to bow to no one except for themselves. He said, I'm going to bring these people in and destroy you. Is more or less what he is saying. The justice I'm bringing is going to come at the hands of these conquerors. That would not sit well with Habakkuk. That wouldn't sit well with you or me. Imagine that. Imagine crying out for God for mercy and justice. And God's like, I'm going to bring justice, but it's not the justice that you are seeking. And he goes on to say this. Habakkuk responds to God with a second complaint. And he starts to complain to God by basically comparing the evil, wickedness, and sinfulness of the Chaldeans compared to the holiness of God. And what he's doing, he's basically putting God in court, saying, God, you are a holy God. You are a mighty God. You're a merciful and loving God. How could you allow this to happen? And I think we've done this before, but look how he says this out. Are you not from everlasting, O Lord my God, my Holy One? Comparing God to the Chaldeans, those who are evil, those who are vile, those who might is their God. He says, are you not from everlasting, everlasting? Are you not my God? He says, we shall not die. O Lord, you have ordained them as judgment, and you, O rock, have established them for reproof. You who are of pure eyes and to see evil, and cannot look at wrong, why do you idly look at traitors and remain silent when the wicked swallows up the man more righteous than he? He says, how can you do this? You're a holy God who cannot look upon evil, and yet you're going to use evil. You're going to use this wickedness. He says, you make mankind like the fish of the sea, like crawling things that have no ruler. He brings all them up with a hook. He drags them out with his net. He gathers them in his dragnet, so he rejoices and is glad. Therefore he sacrifices to his net and makes offerings to his dragnet. For by them he lives in luxury. His food is rich. Is he then to keep emptying his net and mercilessly killing nations forever? And what he's doing, he's using this analogy of this fish idea. He's saying, he's appealing to God's creation. You have made man like the fish, but these people, these Chaldeans, this king, is going to come in and drag us all up in his nets and basically kill us. And you're going to sit idly by and do this? And look how he ends verse 1 of chapter 2. I will take my stand at my watchpost and station myself on the tower and look out to see what he will say to me and what I will answer concerning my complaint. So he responds to God's directive that he's going to bring the Chaldeans in judgment. He says, I don't understand how you're going to do this. I don't understand how you can look idly by. So I'm going to stand here and listen and wait for you to respond to me. Almost like a self-righteous comparing God to the Chaldeans, saying, you are better than this, God. How could you ever actually do this? And he's going to stand there on the watchtower as a prophet and wait for God's response. And look what God says in verse 2 through 5 of chapter 2. And the Lord answered me, write this vision, make it plain on the tablets so he may run who reads it. We get this imagery of someone writing on the tablets and that messenger running to tell the public people all this that God has given them. For still the vision awaits appointed time. It hastens to the end. It will not lie. If it seems slow, wait for it. It will surely come. It will not delay. Saying that the message that I'm bringing to you, the judgment that is coming. It will not delay. You don't have to wait long for it. It will be here. In verse 4, behold, his soul, meaning the Chaldeans, his soul is puffed up. It is not upright within him. But the righteous, not the Chaldeans, those people who are faithful. Going back to verse 4, when it says, for the wicked surround the righteous, it says, you guys, the true righteous ones, not the Chaldeans, you guys, you shall live by faith. Moreover, wine is a traitor, an arrogant man who is never at rest. His greed, going back to the Chaldeans, his greed is as wide as Sheol. Like death, he is never enough. He gathers for himself all nations, collects his own people. And God's responding back to him when Habakkuk says, I'm waiting for you to see what you're going to say. And he says, trust me. It's basically what he just said. He says, trust me. It's coming. Judgment's coming. It will not delay. The Chaldeans will come. They'll take you captive. They'll bring judgment on you at the hands of me. They're going to do this. It will not delay. But the righteous ones will live by faith. He's saying, Habakkuk, you righteous people, you group who are living by me, living by my word, I need you to trust me. I need you to listen to me. And I need you to believe that I am sovereign. I need you to believe that I have a plan. Those people, verse 5, they are arrogant. They'll never rest. They are greedy. They have death. Even though they gather all these things, they'll never be satisfied. He said, well, yes, for a moment they're going to come in and bring destruction. I still have a plan. I still have a purpose. And you will live by faith. Answering the question to come back to, God, where are you? God, why are you doing this? And God responds by saying, I need you to trust me. Those who live by faith are credited for righteousness. Those who live by faith trust in God, trust in his plan. And Habakkuk here does not like what he hears. He does not like what he's seeing, but he's called to trust. And that's true for you and for me, because everything that we see in this world, all the wickedness, all the evilness, all the sin that we see, we don't like it. We would love for it to come to an end. We'd love for it to see its ultimate destruction. But we can't control that. Right now we can trust and we can live by faith. It's not a blind faith. You know why it's not blind faith? Because we have Jesus. The day that he came into this world, we saw this massive battle, evil and good. Satan, Christ. And Satan thought he had the last laugh when Jesus, the Son of God, was placed on the cross. Imagine being one of the people watching this as a follower of Christ, as a follower of his disciples, his mother, his friends. God, how are you letting this happen? How are you allowing evil to destroy your son? And God's looking back upon us and saying, this is justice and mercy meeting together. That my son right now is taking upon him the sin that my justice requires. That's the punishment that my justice requires. That something perfect has to die. And Jesus died for that. He died in what seemed like the darkest moment ended up being one of the greatest moments in human history, where justice and mercy and love and compassion all met together, and sin was defeated, death was overcome, and Jesus came out of the grave ruling and reigning, which is why now you and I can live by faith, knowing that the final battle has already been won. The final victory has already been secured. We may not know and trust. We may not be able to understand everything that we see today, but we can trust. We may not like what we see. We may not like what we have to endure, but we can trust because he overcame. And because he overcame, so too can we. We'll spend time tomorrow seeing more about what Habakkuk has to respond to all these things. And we spend time in chapter 2 tomorrow.